Hi there, and thanks very much once again for subscribing to and joining in with the Explaining History video channel. I'm doing the video I'm going to do today because it's something I've been teaching online with my school at Interhigh, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why it was the 17th century in not just England but Scotland and Ireland was such a time of religious conflict. From the end of James I's reign all the way through to the Glorious Revolution at the end of the century, frequently there were either wars fought over religion, or there were bloody conflicts that were just bubbling under the surface, ready to explode, and crises narrowly averted. So throughout the century, there's a constant religious tension. Now, in order to understand it, we need to kind of rewind and go back to the previous century, the 16th century. What we saw in the 16th century was, under Henry VIII, the break with Rome, where Henry VIII, wanting to have a divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and unable to do so, gets rid of Cardinal Wolsey, his chief advisor, and after a couple of years later, Thomas Cromwell decides that the only way to get the divorce is to get rid of the papal influence altogether. And this was one key aspect of religion that had been dominant in the British Isles since the very, very early Middle Ages, since long before the Norman conquests. Finally undone. England was taken out of the Church of Rome. Henry VIII didn't believe himself to have left the Church of Rome. He believed himself to be a Catholic till the day he died, but he was now simply the head of the Church. It was his son, Edward VI, who brought about a Protestant Reformation in England, and then his daughter, Mary I, after Edward had died, who reintroduced England back into the Catholic Church. Finally, after she died, Elizabeth was left with Elizabeth I was left with the difficult job of trying to find a compromise between Catholics and Protestants. She managed it, but it was an uneasy compromise, with radicals on either side not particularly happy, and Catholics still experiencing a great deal of persecution and having their lands taken away from them. And after Elizabeth dies, the problem is passed on to James I. And he was a very intelligent and pragmatic king. He knew when to compromise. He knew when to kind of take a step back and when to to appease, and he was also a very sociable kind of character, one who was quite popular, and his son Charles I has none of these qualities. Now, it's under the reign of Charles I that the settlement that Elizabeth created finally starts to unravel, and one of the key reasons, so our key reason number one, why there was a century of religious turmoil is because the unsolved problems of the Tudor era come back to haunt the Stuart monarchs, from particularly Charles I, and the problems that they never managed to fully resolve then explode. Charles I makes life a lot more difficult for himself than he needed to. Charles I was a person who believed in the might of the crown. He believed that the king and the church together should be seen as very grand and impressive and very imposing. He believed that the church laws and doctrine and practices throughout all the three kingdoms, England, Scotland and Ireland, should be consistent, and that they should be what he referred to as thorough. All laws should be thorough. Everything should be done as it is set out in law. Obviously, when the church authorities across England and Scotland and Ireland received their orders from Westminster, they applied them in ways that were suitable and appropriate for the local area. These would be the local areas that they knew. The other problem that Charles has is that in England there is Anglican Protestantism, in Ireland there is Catholicism, and in Scotland there is Presbyterianism. So you have three different kinds of Christianity within the British Isles, and in Wales there is a variety of Anglican and Catholic, small Catholic communities, and different, mainly Anglicanism in Wales. In England as well, Puritans, who have been active since the time of Edward VI, have begun to become more and more radical, and they have a different way of looking at the world. Now here's problem number two. You have an increase in literacy, an increase in the availability of printing, and an increase in the numbers of people writing about religious matters. You have a Bible that is now translated into English and from Latin, and so people can read it, they can read what it says, they can have a good think about it, and very often many of the things that are written in the Bible do not appear consistent with the way in which the church is teaching about things. For example, Jesus' early ministries are seen as very simple affairs, and indeed in the Bible it says that they were, that Jesus preached outside, that he did not need to be in a church, that he did not need to be dressed in finery or have gold candelabras. And Jesus said in the Bible, that God is all around, God is everywhere. And when Puritans read this in the 16th and 17th centuries, they concluded that the structure of the church was quite unnecessary and in some ways corrupted and corrupting, and that there was no need for formal worship, that one could have a relationship with God wherever. Now, problem number three is that the king has an advisor, Archbishop William Laud. And William Laud was very much like the king and wanted to ensure that the laws of the church were enforced rigorously, and that small radical sects with new ideas about not just religion but also about society, that these should be stamped out, and that there should be a requirement on people to properly go to church. In centuries past this might have been possible, but the society has evolved and changed to the extent in the early 17th century that parliamentarians, many of whom are Puritans, are unwilling to accept these kinds of rules. The single most significant cause of the Civil War, really, is the debates over religion, and the fact that it has issues like taxation are indeed important, but these are religious wars. Religious wars that are fought throughout the United Kingdom. Why is it then that the issue of religion goes unresolved really till the end of the century? Well, firstly, the victors of the Civil War, the parliamentarians, fail really to create a religious settlement that heals the divided nation at the end of the Civil War. They fail to fully reform what they view as the problems with the Anglican Church. And when Oliver Cromwell dies, and when King Charles II returns to the throne after 1660, it is Charles II takes an approach rather more like James I, pragmatic, and hopes that these issues will ultimately subside. And it's under his brother James II where they reignite themselves again, when James II converts to Catholicism and finally does the unmentionable thing, the unspeakable thing of having a male Catholic heir, which once again the country reacts very angrily about, and with a great deal of fear and suspicion. Why were people so frightened? Well, there was a fear, really, that another civil war would break out. And particularly if people were wary of a Catholic heir coming to the throne because of memories of Mary I, who had burned Protestant martyrs. The final thing that essentially ends the problems of the 17th century is when William III comes from the Netherlands with his wife Mary and seizes the throne, in essence, forces James to flee. Part of the deal that William has with Parliament is the signing of a Bill of Rights, and that Bill of Rights ensures that only Protestants will sit on the throne in the future. So, part of the problem here is that at the end of the First Civil War, and the first period of civil wars up to 1649, no final conclusion to those struggles was ever fully made, and it takes really until the Bill of Rights after the Glorious Revolution of 1688 to conclude and to finally put an official resolution to England's religious turmoil. So there you go, some ideas about why we have this century of religious conflict. It must be said, of course, that that's not the only thing that happened during the 17th century. There are all sorts of other key events and developments, but that's one of the main ones that's worth really looking up. Now, if you found this useful, click down below. There's my giant finger. Click down below and subscribe to this YouTube channel, and you'll get, as often as I can, but normally once or twice a week, new videos on how to study history and new videos on different topics in history. And you can also go to my podcast, which is explaininghistory.podhoster.com, and we're now close to 100,000 subscribers, so it must be pretty good. Anyway, thanks very much, and I'll look forward to speaking to you on the next video, Explaining History video. All the best, bye-bye.